Eu não ia apresentar os nossos painelistas, como eu disse, mas fazer uma breve apresentação. Ao meu lado eu tenho Rodrigo Arias, Head of Group do Intergrity da FIFA, Fernando Gomes, advogado em Portugal, uma ampla experiência em nível internacional e na área de governança, João Nogueira da Rocha, árbitro do CAS, advogado da FIFPRO, advogado estabelecido em Portugal, com uma ampla atuação internacional, Emanuel Medeiros, estou correto em dizer, Head da SIGA, CEO da SIGA, que é o que hoje é uma instituição não governamental, multiparitária, que se dedica exatamente ao estudo e à apresentação de soluções, se propõe a isso exatamente.
Solutions proposed, very focused on integrity and governance. That said, due to Rodrigo's time schedule is rather narrow, so it was of extreme kindness on his part to come here. A brief introduction. When we are talking about financial integrity, there are several aspects that should be considered, and obviously we shall not be able to assess them all in a 45 minutes panel. So we chose only a few topics to deal with today: net fixing, property ownership and clubs co-ownership, financial fair play, ethical problems engaging the football's own family. It has to do with sport management and interaction and collaboration that exists between the entities that administrate at the national and international level sports, between the state and all those who fight corruption and crime. We are fully aware that football, and I usually put it this way, I think it's a term that could define it well, it's an adult forwarding of what, as considering the revenues that are generated, all the social roots imbued with it. It's an adult that is not yet mature. Football still has to use and apply governance practice that are so common in other areas, such as industry, trade in general, any other entrepreneurship. I still recall a Congress in Madrid last year where if we could go back to 10 years ago and we talk about the allocation of qualities for a good manager in the sportive areas, integrity was not part of their qualities. All the more so, we had several astonishing episodes involving clubs, sport administration at its various levels. Not nowadays. At least nowadays, this good governance policy demands integrity to be aimed for in the man who manages a federation or a confederation. That said, I shall now directly step into, and our analysis will deal with the risks and the tools available so that we can grab the maximum of integrity to maintain the balance in competition, so that the financial house will live at football. Rodrigo, I should start asking you.
Match fixing. How FIFA tackled that within the last years? We know that you accessed more than around 20 cases within the last years successfully. So if you could describe what's at stake here, what's the approach of FIFA in this regard of match fixing, which is a cancer that it's affecting all the game.
Sure. Bueno, primero que todo, muy buenas tardes a todos. Es un placer para mí estar en Lisboa. Es una ciudad lindísima y es mi tercera vez que estoy aquí. I will answer in English, of course. I will start by saying that match manipulation, investigations, cases, offenses, in my opinion, are probably the most difficult topics to target at FIFA level in a disciplinary front. It's not the same if you're in a game and you have like I don't know, discriminatory racist chants, or you have flares in the stadium, fires or violence. You have objective elements of proof. You conduct a proceeding and you get a sanction. In our case, to prove manipulation of matches and competitions is thoroughly difficult. And therefore, as you said it, Daniel, we have done, as from 2018 moving forward, over 20 cases at FIFA level. This is, for you who don't know, this is for me personally an extraordinary figure that represents the work we have done in the federation. The spectrum of these cases have targeted everybody. We have done intermediaries, we have done cases on coaches, cases on referees, cases on players, and cases on football officials. We sometimes say, people say, FIFA doesn't tackle football executive officials. We do, and we have done it. No? We have done it primarily, I will be very brief, defining policy in our sense, because integrity, as probably you know, and Emmanuel will probably agree with me, words and messages are very important, but they need to be supported by policy and actions. We have to see actions, we have to set objectives, and we have to find a way to make things happen. So we did that, we defined the policy. FIFA's policy right now are basically two branches, which is the promotion of integrity. FIFA's statutory objective is to promote integrity. Promote signifies being active. So the first lesson is we cannot work on integrity keeping still. We have to do stuff, we cannot be reactive on these alerts. And second pillar is the protection of the competitions. You know, as the European League said, I mean, we are protecting the integrity of the competitions. If a product is corrupted, it has no value, we do that, right? So in a nutshell, we gathered the information we had as of 2018, we refreshed it with a new set of integrity partners and created intelligence to do that, which produced a high number of what we call prima facie reports, which are investigative reports that we conduct and refer to the secretariats of the independent judicial bodies. And the result of that is, as you told, the number of cases we have delivered successfully. We're proud of that, but as the colleagues will say later, a lot to be done yet, okay? So just to finish, we have two branches. One is development, which is, aside from this, is working with the associations and confederations, enabling them to have capacity to do this. And second is actions, investigation, digging deep in places where people don't like to dig, and find solutions to the alerts, more or less like that.
Emmanuel, your thoughts on that? Do you think it's still shy, the action of the governing bodies to tackle that? Do you think there's a concrete development on that? What do you think about that? The results, the outcome already achieved is enough?
I think there are definitely new winds blowing towards more integrity in sport. But again, the deep roots still remain there. There is generally poor governance, lack of oversight, lack of diligence, lack of meaningful, trustworthy cooperation between all the key partners. I include the governments, who sometimes navel gaze and turn a blind eye to what should be a priority for them. Sport is much more than a game. Sport has a huge, unrivaled impact in global society and global economy. It generates income streams. It has an impact on youth. But if you look to the organic structure of governments, then you won't see any Minister of Sport, normally Secretary of State, and in some cases like the United States, it's not even there, right? So, yes, progress has been made, but much more needs to be done. I am frustrated, I would say more than frustrated, because we all know how grave and how deep goes the rabbit hole. And yet you see, within sport, competition, where there should be cooperation. You see jealousy, where there should be a community of efforts. If we want to tackle problems like match fixing, which have in its origin organized crime, illegal gambling syndicates that operate worldwide, and gangrene the whole economic system, then we need to create a united front. And that involves governments, international organizations, sport movement, global businesses, and civil society. The role and contribution that Soccerex does by highlighting this topic is in itself significant. But there is more to be done. There is no need for more conventions if those conventions are just a paper that are signed by a few and never translated into action. On the 1st of September, a new convention entering into force. But what's happened in reality? Who has the national platforms equipped to prevent and fight against match manipulation and other detrimental practices? Very few countries. So lack of leadership is still reigning here. And to fill that void, We and others created the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, fully independent. We have no strings attached, we pay no favors, and we bow to anyone. But we welcome the contribution of everyone to help us build the solutions, create this trust among all key stakeholders. And I'm particularly glad to see UEFA coming to us, signing a cooperation agreement. I welcome also the efforts done by FIFA. And I would like to say this, everybody knows that I'm neutral here. The positive steps have been so significant that FIFA started by having the right people leading the integrity front. With Emilio Garcia, with Rodrigo, with Oliver and others, people who have dedicated their professional lives to ensure that the standards are at the highest level and keep the game clean from unscrupulous, undue influence.
Entirely agree. Rodrigo, one more question. Can you give us a concrete example? Because from the outside, I speak a lot about that, I study, but I'm not involved in combating that. I made a mistake. I'll switch to Portuguese, okay? After Rodrigo. So, which example could you give us of a cooperation that worked, made between FIFA and one state authority, specifically, if you can?
Sure, sure.
Just to make sure that we can understand how this works, because I'm quite sure that it's difficult to do that without the collaboration of the authorities.
It's very difficult, and going back to what Emmanuel said, we have also part of our policy is we work with the people who wants to work with us. You know, so if we have a country in which we have collaboration and cooperation with state authorities and the member association, we do try to do the best out of it. I can say, I mean, I live in Madrid. I've seen a lot of examples of Madrid, but we cannot go too long down the road. Yesterday, for example, was the hearing of this macro trial between of the Levante Zaragoza case,
yes,
which is a case we began when I was in La Liga. This is an amazing, very complex case on match manipulation.
We were prevented to use Wellington in the match because he's a witness there.
He's a witness, and I'm sorry about that. But you know, the law is the law, and we have to.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is now out of FIFA's reach, but it's very important because it has been a perfect example of a case. Well, in Spain, as you probably know, match manipulation is a crime, so it has been taken by the ordinary justice. But this is a case that has brought over 30 people into trial in a match manipulation case on a promotion relegation match, which one of the things we have to see is how do we quantify the damage of manipulation with the financial situation of the teams and clubs. This is the difference between keeping first category budget or going into second division in elite European competitions, for example. So that is a good case. And just to follow up briefly, last year, because it is significant, also in Europe, in Ukraine, for example, with cooperation, the police raided 35 professional football clubs in the country, which for you, more or less to have an idea, this means almost 70% of the professional football clubs in the league were raided by police in a very big and complex ongoing case. We saw over 300 people involved in potentially wrongdoing through corruption and manipulation. So this cannot be done. FIFA, as there's like a team that says FIFA is not the police of the world. I agree, but when we can do things with the police and state authorities, public policy and such, we welcome that, and we can truly see the benefits. As you know, it's a very delicate and sensitive matter, and as long as we have cooperation from these state authorities, the more the better, for sure.
Fernando, João, isso não estava no script, mas eu queria saber a opinião de vocês.
It's not on the script, but I would like to know your opinion. Does match fixing has anything to do with, it has to do with bets, which has been a double source of revenues for several clubs, particularly in markets such as the Premier League? To which extent is it healthy, though, that money? Should it continue to flow into sports? To which extent should some regulation? In a way, we have evidence, reasonable evidence, that market actually disqualifies betting. Any consideration under this matter? Myself? Yeah. First of all, thank you. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you, Soccerex, for this opportunity. Daniel, money from bets is mostly welcome for football, and it even has positive facts such as technology itself associated to gambling. It allows us to monitor suspicious behaviors and immediately being detected. That is positive. Now the worry, in line with what Manuel mentioned, maybe Manuel knows the numbers. Our worry is about illegal gambling. Most of gambling is illegal. What is hidden, that is our main worry. 80%. We're talking about 80% of gambling. These are figures. Most of it is illegal. We are talking about gambling connected to illegal practice, money laundering, corruption, you name it, everything evil. And when we talk about financial integrity, what we perceive is that there is a financial spill in the club's property. That's our main worry. The institutions take time to react. They take a long time to regulate. They take a long time to understand amongst themselves. But organized crime is very swift. They know exactly where to come into. Without further ado, I would give you an example. In Portugal, we had a case of a club, Athletic Club de Portugal, who was acquired by a Chinese company already well known by match fixing in other countries, and it was acquired in front of everything. There were illegal practice, of course, I don't know, but the club was in the second league. In 2 years, they dropped twice in terms of division. Then it would not do anymore. They dropped it, and the leaders disappeared, and they dropped the club. So this is a practical example on our worries. So I myself, I think the companies will start to change. I'm going to change a little bit the subject. Club ownership. What are the risks involved in it? What can one identify? What is the evil in this regard? Considering the example of this Chinese company that purchased a club. What's the problem in the TPO transition, buying small parts in the market towards club ownership? And then I want to hear Club Emmanuel, and then your time will come to address co-ownership, the property of another club. Let's put it this way: you are a Brazilian. So you're well-known Brazilian, you know how things work in the real world. We can think TPO is over, but it is not. TPO goes on. Rodrigo is not listening to this, despite the official version. But it's still there, it still exists. This is current and rooted practice. But the fact is, many of the funds are over, and they changed their investments from third-party ownership for the club's property. But the questions connected to TPO, namely conflicts of interests and influencing regarding sportive interests, forcing the trainer, the coach to put a certain player there and there, the influence of economic interest, all that still remain exactly the same way or at a worse manner. So one needs to, we need to create a harmonized system of control regarding the investors in clubs, so that we can find out who are the last effective beneficiaries. Otherwise, there will be conflict of interests, huge conflict of interests. Agents who own clubs, agents who have business with third parties and players, their integrity associated to competition, all the more so, you are fully aware of it. More and more, there are players transfer with no economic rationale that make no sense at all. But there are transfer windows in the middle of the season. We have people we don't know who they are behind the club with the power to influence the decision-making process, strengthening or the opposite. So the problem gets there. It all starts with the origin of capital. It goes on with the conflict of interest, and then sportive influence, and it ends with the competition's integrity. This is the sequence. This is worrying. A fertile field, money that we don't know where it comes from. So it's completely disqualifying. Regarding the ownership of another claim, the co-ownership, what problems? We are talking about the limitation of the number of loans, because some clubs will retain groups. Sometimes they dequalify this practice. What are the problems in this field? This is an area of extreme worry. It's completely opaque. It's not transparent. That shocks me. Problems have long been identified due to lack of data, lack of diligence, lack of scrutiny regarding the origin of those capitals. The driving force of these investors, they didn't come yesterday. Yesterday, I said regarding other issues connected to the persistence lack of a cleaning house, so that we could strengthen control and supervision on financial flows. My voice hurts when I recall the days I have spent trying to raise the authorities' awareness for the need of these mechanisms and these transparent platforms. There is an imperious need of leadership on the part of FIFA to revise the ownership of sportive companies, and even at the national level. That has to be done seriously, not pure cosmetics, not a facade. Those measures have not yet been enforced. Why aren't we aware who are the true owners of social capital, the ultimate beneficial owners? Why do we allow a countless number of financial transactions in offshores? These practices happen when there is some inconvenience in terms of financial transparency. This hypocrisy has to end, this duplicity. This has to finish. We have to find out about the origin of this capital. We have to know about the reliability of these investors. Otherwise, it will be pure speculation and the death of a few signals. And that will continue to happen in the future. Another thing I would like to put to you, we are before a domain of manifest public interest. Governments cannot be a part of this, regardless of all general elections. Why is it OECD and the Financial Analyst Task Force no longer consider financial integrity in sport as a priority? I challenge publicly here all the incumbents of this body and OECD to sit down with me and debate this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Why is it for more than 15 years I have been defending the creation of a cleaning house by the sportive instancy, and it only exists in the UK and in a somehow shy manner in Italy? Why is it? Why do we think that everything is a bed of roses, and when it comes through our doors, everyone is in awe? Why? Let's go back to that last item. And to finalize, because time is short, we have to think of all these lack of leadership that still exists. That's why we put into practice a whole set of universal standards that cover all the domains of sport integrity, including financial integrity. I invite you all present here to visit our website. It's all there. And I also invite all the sportive organizations to adopt us. It's not enough to proclaim this. We have to deal with the fans, with the investors. Hold on. There will be time. Otherwise, someone will kill me here. João, financial fair play. We hear a lot about that. Give me a description of a few concrete cases that they have been faced up with regarding financial fair play default, if it is possible for you to convey any public disclosure. It's very important for financial integrity, too. Very swiftly, I would like to explain. financial fair play is the UEFA licensing for clubs who wish to participate in European competitions. So that licensing forces the clubs that wish to enter both Champions or European League, they have to abide by certain criteria. These criteria begin with sportive criteria, infrastructures, legal, financial. Normally, the clubs claudicate in the financial sector because clubs cannot have negative results. That is, they cannot have the ritual break-even. That means expenses that the club possesses, compensated with the revenues, cannot lead to a figure less than zero. If that happens, the club will not be part of the European competitions. In this regard, in the regard of these figures that UEFA demands, zero break-even, there is certain flexibility. They accept a negative balance of less than 5 million. But nevertheless, what do the clubs have to do? On 31st of March, they have to present their accounts. They have to prove that on December 31st of the preceding seasons, before the European competition, they cannot be indebted. Break-even will have to be zero then. So there cannot be any debts with the players or employees or with the clubs or with state bodies. Social Security in Portugal and the tax authority. If the club has negative results, all that is scrutinized, this licensing procedure starts at the national level. But the Portuguese Federation of Football initially starts its licensing, and it might not even reach UEFA. There's a decentralization of this UEFA competence for the national federations. If there is a problem, if there is a financial problem, then it goes to UEFA for an investigation chamber. This chamber has powers to investigate and to monitor the clubs. And after the investigation deadline, there are 4 ways possible. The proceedings are filed, or they go to an adjudicatory chamber, where our colleague may there apply a sanction, or have an agreement between UEFA and the clubs. So basically, financial fair play is in a swift way. As I have put it, most of the revenues come from the European competition, so for them it's of the utmost importance. Of course, if you are addressing clubs that have no interest at all due to their own classification, they will never be ranked first. This question of financial fair play will never be important to them in international terms. But in international territory, there are debts with certain employees and with the states. And forgive me, what are the most repetitive situations that, in terms of the appeals following contacts with the UEFA? It's always different criteria. Is it always a different criteria, alleging there's a lack of opinion within that those differences? What appears the most there? Normally, there is a financial problem. And the clubs, sometimes rightfully so, they try to justify it. I have this deficit, 160 millions or 200 millions, but now in the medium range I will have a partnership with a new investor who will inject money here, and by doing it in terms of sponsorship, I will manage to solve this problem. I can allege this. And then start the problems of knowing whether that actually is a sponsorship or whether it's an illegal inflow of capital in a club, because UEFA doesn't allow that. You have the 3 last recent cases. This Milan, this lawsuit ended recently. Milan in December 2016 says, we sold our capital, Mr. Berlusconi, to a Chinese company. There will be a capital inflow, a Chinese capital inflow here, and I will recover my financial capacity. So I will present the result of these last 3 years, and I shall try to demonstrate they can reach the break-even. This goes to the investigation chamber. They might not agree, and they say they cannot recover under these terms. They send these proceedings to the chamber of decision. The adjudicatory chamber applies without any possibility to compete for 2 years. They appeal, and they say, actually, this is all acknowledged, but another evidence has been added. So there's a new lawsuit. People appreciate the file, and they are deeply appreciated. They tend then to lower the file to the adjudicatory chamber, according to new facts, and UEFA maintains the very same years. Milan appeals for cash, and there is an agreement. There's a consent award. There is an agreement between UEFA and Milan, agreed in a whole year. Casimir is the UMPAP proceedings, where UMPAP, it's not exactly UMPAP. I don't want to step into too much detail, but basically, PSG obtains from the EDR Foundation an inflow of 140 millions. That is questioned whether that sponsorship was worth that amount of money. Two companies are hired. One of them says it's perfectly adjusted. The other one says that sponsorship was only worth 20 million euros at best. Then there's a lawsuit. UEFA applies the research core, sends into the adjudicatory chamber, and the adjudicatory chamber, if I'm not mistaken, I think the final result basically is, I think the adjudicatory chamber decides to apply the sanction, but between the period when it was sent until it reaches the adjudicatory chamber cannot take more than 10 years. And when the adjudicatory chamber applies the decision, more than 10 days had already passed, so it was all annulled. So there was no possibility to compete. So it was their luck. So procedural cases. And the one mentioned the most is the Manchester City case. Der Spiegel announced there is an illegal inflow in the club, and research sends it to the adjudicatory chamber. And at this stage, at CAS, they have the appeals to know whether basically Manchester City wishes to annul the decision that sends it to the adjudicatory chamber. That is what is at stake. As a South American, I have a South American lawyer. If you advocate out of Europe, but if you have a credit to charge a European club, sometimes in parallel to procedure before FIFA, it's highly convenient to offer a claim, a notice of an offense. You will not demand on behalf of your clients before the licensing body or before the UEFA centralizer. You will claim upon this, and many times the result is sometimes swifter when the club is worried about the renovation of their license. You're
trying to implement worldwide system very similar to that. I remember that. It's still, this idea is still, it's sleeping, or FIFA is aiming to do that. We know that the difficulties to apply that in many other
Which system?
the worldwide licensing system
Sure.
within the same terms. I know it's difficult. In Asia, for instance, I think it's the second one that works quite well. It's possible to use that, but it's still in the radar of FIFA to implement that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's one of the professionalization of football. As you know, it happens in Europe first, and as many things do, and sometimes they flow down. Okay, here you go. You hear me okay? Yes. So I know it because we work closely. It's not my department, but we work closely with that because we're trying also to push Intergrity to be one of the core elements of the licensing system at FIFA.
Okay.
In the sense of, aside from everything else they have to do in order to, safeguard in the financial integrity,
Information.
infrastructure, registering of players, etc.
Okay.
To have the integrity component, because it's critical for us to have, And we tell the member associations once and again, you can have the best football competitions, right? And the best stadiums and the best registration system. If you don't have a healthy competition, if the public opinion is of the idea that the football competitions are predetermined, that they are bought and that they are corrupted, then the product itself is not is of no value. No? The licensing system, I know it's ongoing. Depending on the continental scope, it's more advanced than not.
Okay.
Because it's a stage, it has transitions, but our team definitely is working hard on having that put in place, and we have a lot of success stories of member associations that 5 years ago had no licensing system or regime. Now they have it, they have connectivity, and we are, as you know,
I think you can just hold that.
with FIFA Connect, we are all connected in that sense, It's going and it's going well.
Okay. I'm gonna keep you safe for this question because it's tricky and I don't want you to.
Okay, I won't answer. Huh?
For you free. Eu me lembro que quando num primeiro momento o PSG
I remember that the first moment when PSG contracted Kivok, it was on a loan. And we saw some doubts if it was really a loan or it was a way of adapting the operations so that there was nothing against the regulations to circumvent.
sem nenhum compromisso de saber a fundo, eu queria saber a opinião de você, se ainda
I'd like to know your opinion if this is a practice, and specifically in that case, is it common practice? Can we identify what are the criteria that we can use to find the indicators here? It was a player, there was an interest, and then it came through for a definite transfer. Well, I think the following. Let's try and see this in purely economic terms. A player costs 120 million euros and signs a contract, a 5-year contract, and would do. And those 120 million euros would be paid up front. That imbalances the finances of the club that year. So this operation is an operation of dividing over 5 years the amortization of the players' pass. So 20 million euros per year is not so imbalancing. I'm not a technician on this, and the fact that we have these sports companies and can only have public limited sports companies and cannot have others competing these professional competitions. So we have to have exact balance sheets. So we send a file to the Portuguese Federation, who then sends it to UEFA. The balance sheets are all the same, and then they will analyze this. In terms of amortization, there's no cost that year. I can see that it can be a maneuver to buy a player, but what is interesting here, this is my personal opinion. I've never had any of these cases at the CAS. This is just an opinion, but I think it seems that, well, deep down, what do we want to achieve with financial fair play? We want clubs not to spend more than the financial resources. We want sustainability, so there are no debts for creditors, and we want the long-term football sustainability. So if by buying a player with a long-term payment, that's not shocking to me. Well, Daniel, let me just add something regarding fair play. We've been talking about this for a long time. In my point of view, this is a good principle. It's a good principle, but it is clearly insufficient. Let's think about a Portuguese case. We have 40 clubs in professional leagues, and how many are subject to financial fair play? 5, 6, 7, and what about the other 30-something? The other 30-something, of course, we have internal rules, but they're clearly not enough. So we need stricter rules. Well, for the other clubs, they are less strict. Then we have clubs who have salesnerias. Those they have pair. It's a judicial recovery plan, and they have 1, 2, 3, and they continue participating. So, in spite of the financial fair play, and even at the European level, 90% of clubs, and these are official figures, 90% of European clubs do not publish their financial reports. In spite of the financial fair play rules, 70% of European clubs are close to bankruptcy because they don't have sustainability. But this is a lot of work to be done. So the institutions are slow to react, but go in line with the standards. We need rules for common rules of financial integrity, minimum rules of implementation. Nationally, they must be implemented. So we need a common standard. Of course, financial fair play at the UEFA level needs to be more demanding. I understand that let's not demand a club, even though it is professional in the Portuguese league that has financial demand standards that are high, but we have to have a minimum. We need standards for everybody. Well, I agree with you, but let me go back to what Manuel said in the beginning. Maybe this is only feasible in an effective way if FIFA adopts the mechanism of scrutinizing these activities and inspect them. Because then it's up to the criterion of the local federation. We know that clubs that have a better relationship end up not being punished. I'd like to take advantage, because Rodrigo doesn't have much time, to bring another topic that I think is important and bearing in mind with, I would say, what we can call an inside job. It's a very critical term. It's ironic. Well, okay, inside job.
When we have the enemy inside of the institution. So I think the ethics procedures and the ethics issues that we have and that we've been seeing, as Emmanuel just told, and I had the opportunity to work actively in some of these cases representing some Uruguayan clubs against the former president and vice presidents of Comebol, Figueiredo and Grondona, and I can tell you that when you have an official like the ranking of Grondona that occupied like 5 seats in FIFA statements, and also Figueiredo, when they decide to do something that is not exactly in line with the rules, that's the same of match fixing. The disaster
corruption.
is the same.
What you are referring is corruption.
It's the same.
Pure and simple.
Bribery, because it represents a title with a championship. And I remember one statement that Grondona was caught saying that I won many titles with the line, with the, not the referee, but
The linesman.
Assistant ref.
Liner.
with the line.
Linesman.
So this represents a lot of money that affects the integrity, the financial integrity of the competition. So in regards to the ethics procedures, we've been seeing FIFA acting actively that, but I'm sorry for making a very transparent provocation.
Sure.
We know that FIFA was actively tackling that much more after that strong action from governing authorities, not only from US, but also from Switzerland, Brazil, Uruguay. There was a real cooperation to combat the criminals that were taking advantage of their position in the system, okay? Misusing, doesn't matter. But for my surprise, I was checking yesterday the composition of the so-called independent, and I'm sorry to be very strong on that, and I know people that compose that they're not independent, because they are linked to some governing bodies within a national level from a long time, and I'm not saying any names. On the other half, I haven't seen among the 17 members, nobody from the 5 big leagues or Portugal, and nobody from the US. But you can find some people from New Guinea without any prejudice. You can find people from Gibraltar, Vanuatu, Kenya, American Samoa, Rwanda, Colombia, to not my team, also from Brazil. So I think the representation that it's so-called, and I know Emmanuel will like what I'm saying here because he defends that. How can we consider that, independent a committee, despite the fact that the president is a former president of the European Court of Justice, and then, of course, the seat of the head is preserved, but all the other members, we have a vast majority from countries that doesn't represent I mean, the best football in the world and not even the best practice in their own countries. So what I think is, I know the effort, I know we challenge, but I don't think that, I would like to understand why it's an independent committee, because I'm sure that the indications here come from the National Federation. So the name doesn't suit me proper to the composition.
Sure, sure. I mean, it's quite a question as well. So thank you very much for that.
Sorry.
No, but I'm kidding. We have no problem with that. Going first to the first remark, and this is something, and I'm going to speak now as a Latin American because I think it's very important. When FIFA Gate happened, I tell people, you know, it basically was a wave that
I didn't mention Margarita because she's
Yeah.
the part that I...
Yeah. The wave basically washed all the heads of international football from Latin America, CONMEBOL, CONCACAF. But it was also, I say it's fortunate as well for the FIFA Gate to have also streamlined actions tackling top European officials and somewhere else, because then you cannot, you cannot say this problem was a Latin American situation, this was an Asian situation, an African situation, because nowadays nobody can argue that corruption in football was systematically in place, right? There's a lot to be done, and there was just a few of the things that were done. The only way FIFA Gate happened is the way it happened, that it was the U.S. authority aggressively pursuing, you know, what they thought were, and correctly, corruption scandals. In regards to the assignments of the committees and the ethics committee, I mean, the process is what it is in the sense of the members have to be, you know, part of the proposed and part of the representatives of the member associations. But I see it. I can see your point, and I can see people feeling like the system can be much more improved. I mean, I can see it reasonably like that. But I mean, I also can assemble that, and you can probably agree that it's a little bit more the same as the CAS arbitrators in a sense, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the football world is a closed environment. It's a lot of people, it's a closed circuit. And at the end of the day, the responsibility of the position, we have to understand that the people, even though they have this or that criteria, if they are appointed, they have to go to a scrutiny, governance checkup, and we are supposed to understand that the independence is guaranteed. So if you have, for example, as I said the same about CAS, an arbitrator that was formerly Secretary General of a club and he's named by the club side, you know, I can try to understand that he's a professional that will be, you know, independent in his position. The heads of both the Ethics and Disciplinary Committee, the Investigatory Chamber, Adjudicatory Chamber, they have been thoroughly, this is not, I mean, from what I understand, thoroughly checked in the sense of there are decisions that you're not gonna satisfy everybody, and you can have a lot of heat on that, but at the end of the day, it's a tough job. You put your name, your reputation on the table. You have politics in football that also play a big part, and we count on the professionality and the delivery of excellence in the work they do. Sometimes it pleases some audience, sometimes it doesn't. In football, it is like that. But I'm fairly satisfied in the way our cases, talking about our integrity cases, because this is what I can talk about, have been conducted through the different official proceedings. And at the end of the day, if I was to think bad about these governance decision-making bodies, I probably wouldn't be working at FIFA.
Yeah. I will excuse you, but first of all, I just want to, since I know you and I know Emilio and I know the intentions and your career and your curriculum, I'm sure and I rely that you are not only taking the advice lately that is attributed to Grondona, and I don't know if you've heard about that. I don't know if it's true or not, but people say that back there when Michael Garcia was appointed as the president of the investigation chamber of the ethics committee, Grondona would have said to Josep Blatter, "Are you kidding? You're putting an American cop that nobody can control there." And then everything happens as it happens. So I would like to believe that it's not because of his activity that resulted in all this wash that we don't see any Americans inside this committee.
No.
I trust your work.
Yeah. And before I leave, I mean, I just want to also, because we talk about TPO in this sense and financial, just a quick remark, in the sense of there's a new line also of thought we have is, it's not TPO, but it's like third-party influence or unlawful influence from the integrity side, which we have seen and touches on the financial integrity of the clubs. before match manipulation was mainly dealt with the schemes of organizing international friendly matches,
Yeah.
like with Wilson, Rush Perelman and such. And nowadays we have seen that these touches, and I make a calling also to all the Portuguese clubs in this sense and the governance, through sponsorship agreements. So you have companies, third-party companies, in which they sponsor the clubs, and in return to giving them money, they act as youth promoting talent companies, and they say, I'll give you so much 100,000 of euros, but in exchange, you have to put my 3 foreign players to play in the matches I identify. And this is very interesting because we have seen this scheme happen in Central America. We have the Spanish contract saying, this is a youth team, and you have to put these players to play in these matches. And 3 weeks later, we found the same contract in a Northern European club in their specific language with the same provisions. So this is
company.
Yeah, and it touches the financial situation of the clubs. It's money for them, but it is certainly for manipulation purposes.
I know Rodrigo has to leave us, and we have just the questions from you, so I will excuse him and ask for some applause for him. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian.
Thank you. Take care. Thank
Hablamos.
you. Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. Gracias. Hasta luego.
And I think that situations like this explain why the European Union, in its recent report, considered that sport and football in particular is such a sensitive sector. Português, não?
Olha, só para organizar. Considerações finais.
Okay, now for final consideration, Manuel, João, Fernando, and then the audience, if there are any. Okay. Regarding financial integrity, nowadays there's a lot more awareness and predisposition to put into place all arsenal of measures to prevent money laundering or criminal activities or tax evasion or unscrupulous actions by directors and other operators. Significant steps have been taken, but let me say once again, it is constraining to see the speed at which things happen. The problems have been diagnosed for a long time now, as well as we've diagnosed the solutions and therapies. What is stopping and what interests arise to put obstacles in the way for the solutions that have been proven that are necessary and the right ones and to be put into practice? Why do the legal regimes that govern the ownership of the capital of sports companies is still anachronic? Why is there no effective supervision regarding foreign investors? It's not because they are foreigners. There's no problem about the origin of capitals, but there's no supervision, and supervision is not inspected. Why do we continue talking about good governance with limitation of mandates, and when we see the composition of the summit, the top bodies of the organization, 32 international federations, the number of women represented in the executive bodies is 18.3%. Can anybody accept this? So we still live in an enclosed world with all the ticks, a lot of nepotism, in which cooperation between international organizations, national organizations, governments, and other regulators are still taking very feeble steps. I think represents an attitude of non-conformism, and we don't resignate to the status quo. So in a clear 21st century, we need to gather all the support of all partners for the quest of good solutions, and they are condensed in a set of universal standards available on our site. And let me also say, as we've announced in New York in March, let's put into practice an independent rating system. What does this mean? That all federations, leagues and clubs will be scrutinized based on the degree of compliance regarding those standards, and it will be the market, the sponsors, the investors, the fans that also invest their passion that will determine truly the final verdict and who is worthy of that trust and who is unworthy. João. Well, very shortly, we spoke about the TPOs, the third-party ownership, and I have a personal opinion, which is not very much in line with my origin, because the players, both the local union and Swiss Pro, are against third-party ownership. I don't share this opinion. If we take a look at the FIFA regulation, it says that you can only have economic rights, the clubs, the training clubs, or the club where the player is. It seems to me, and especially Portugal, would benefit very much with a system of third-party help. In terms of clubs, we have to see who's going to participate in the economic rights of a certain player. In my opinion, countries like Portugal would benefit a lot from being able to have a partnership between companies, institutional investors, in the sense of helping the clubs. I think we need strong regulation, but I think that peripheral countries like us, we don't have image rights like England, we don't have their strength, nor Italy, nor Spain. We'd benefit a lot of this. And I'm convinced that if we were to do a question to the players if they wanted economic rights, I'm convinced that players would by and large say yes. Well, yes, they'll say yes. I think the enlightened players would say yes. Yes, nowadays players are very much enlightened. Well, it's enlightened on the topic and its pertinence, yes, but they have enough information. Even on today's data, issues like this, they know more than us. It's a pure economic law of investment, and not that deviation of commissions, etc. Regulation is only on economic right and the value stipulated in the contract. So it's regulated and transparent, yes, Fernando. Well, a little bit more of the same thing. I've already mentioned this issue of third-party ownership for the ownership of clubs and associated things. And let me force this note that Emmanuel said about the need for regulation and the definition of minimum standards. Things that make no sense. Let me give you a very quick example. In Portugal, for example, we have a system that comes from FIFA where the middlemen, the agents, have to have a criminal record presented to be able to exercise the activity. Okay, fine, but to be a member of the board of a sports committee, they don't need training, nothing else. Does this make sense? No. Any international criminal can be on behalf of who knows, God knows who, the president and chairman of the board. So we need an element of a public trust. Well, let's see. Behind the clubs and sports companies we have the fans and their love for the club. A Brazilian club has a lot of financial troubles right now, Botafogo. Well, there are several with the salaries in arrears. Well, you can close your eyes and just pick a number. If that club disappears, we have to have the greatest respect for their fans. It's a tragedy. So we have this aspect. This is to protect football, not to make life difficult for anybody. So we need to define rules, implement them, make a plan, and move forward quickly. Larry? Where's Larry?
Can I open the floor 5 minutes? Larry's not here, so... Perguntas, se alguém tiver perguntas.
Questions, if there are questions. Okay. Then the microphone to the gentleman over there, the second one, next to Alexander. No. Good afternoon. I'm João Pereira. I'm from ESNA. I was having an internship with Daniel. My question is, the small and medium clubs, very often, to survive, they have to adopt those practices that are not exactly ethical. Do you feel, the opinion of the panel, that there were financial support for the clubs that adopted those kind of measures, and the leagues that adopted these measures maybe adopt them more easily than just regulate and scrutinize, because very often the club survival, if we have this scrutiny, can result in the extinction of these clubs. Do you feel that financial support with the implementation of these measures and regulation would be beneficial to the clubs and the system? Thank you. Well, I think the practice of risk management and that sick way of running professional clubs irresponsibly cannot be rewarded with any kind of support. Clubs since the 80s have had all sorts of support, petrol pumps, juvenile entrepreneurships run goodness knows how, and television rights, etc. Everything. But there's one thing that is indispensable. We cannot run a football club without the indispensable means for the investments that we are making. Regarding anything else besides that is irresponsibility. And so why do clubs become easy prey of voracious appetites, of hidden interests, of foreign investments, of the greatest opacity, and offshore, and nobody knows who's behind them? Why do situations like Athletic that we mentioned here, and Botafogo, its headquarters in Hong Kong, but connected to the hidden interests of gambling in China? Why do these examples existed? Why did the club get into this situation of vulnerability and nobody was held accountable and lack of consequences? Where was the state and the police authorities and sports authorities? Why do we still have these situations throughout the world? Doesn't anybody rise up? Well, those benefits only originated more demand by the clubs and less commitment. Let me just give you a comment. It's not like that how it works. It's not you should be subsidized to stop with the less ethical practices. It's the other way around. Stairs are cleaned from the top down. It's the rules of financial integrity, scrutiny, and good governance that will make those clubs and those sports partnerships so that can work in a transparent way and be scrutinized by the stakeholders involved, the sponsors, the financiers, the stakeholders, the fans, well, to know how much the chairman of the board earns or what he's been doing in his life. The contracts must be made public. There's a public tender, everything transparent. That's how it should work. There are examples of several organizations that adopted good governance rules and transparency and flourished, in other words. So it's from that moment that they in fact increased the turnover and attracted more sponsors. The stakeholders felt part of that business, the fans, etc., and those sports organizations, instead of withering away, they flourished. It's exactly the other way around. I have to close, otherwise my boss is going to be very upset with me. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask for a round of applause for everybody. Thank you.